So, we're going to talk about taxes.
Oh, yeah.
Just a brief talk about it, really. It's always been one of my things since I was a cook at a restaurant. A buddy of mine that I was working with, Mike Smith, was reluctant to work more hours because his pay went down. And he's like, yeah, dude, I fall into a higher tax bracket if I work more hours. And I'm like, what? He's like, seriously, I gotta check this out. You know, my check goes down. I've done it a couple times. Because he fell into a higher tax bracket. And so I want to make sure you guys understand what that means so you don't fall into the Mike Smith trap, is what I call it, on having a misunderstanding between marginal and average tax rates. So we talk about marginal stuff all the time in this class. So that's completely irrelevant. And here's how the story goes. Let's just say you made $32,000. So suppose your income equals $32,000 this year. And the tax rate kind of looks like this, these brackets, so to speak. So your income, if it falls between 0 and 15,000, then your little t, your tax rate, let's say equals 10%. And if you go from 15 to 30,000, your tax rate climbs to 20%. And then let's say 30,000 to infinity, it caps out at 30%. So first of all, what's that?
It's not real. Money, please.
Yeah, this is not a real tax. This is not the real tax bracket. But it is similar in what they do. So what do you notice about the tax rate and income? What's the relationship you see? A positive or negative relationship between income and the tax rate? Positive, right? So there's a positive relationship. So the idea of our taxing system is called a progressive tax. The rich pay proportionately more than the poor, is the way our tax system has evolved over time. Okay, so back to the question here. Is it possible then for Mike Smith to not want to work an extra shift that bumps him from 30,000 to 30,100? Would that be possible? Because he would be bumped into this bracket and have to pay 30%. And it would actually make him worse off if that happened. That's the trap that he was falling into. And the short of the story is it doesn't work that way. So what did he not understand that I want you guys to understand when we look at brackets like this? Has to do with the word marginal. Marginal revenue is the revenue generated by what? One extra unit. Marginal cost is the cost of a additional unit. Marginal utility was the satisfaction from a additional unit. Okay, so you got that additional thing going. The marginal has something to do here to where you're not going to fall into the Mike Smith trap and be worried about causing yourself to lose money ultimately. Rachel?
So you get taxed 10% on the first 15,000, and then the next 15,000 you get taxed 20% on, but you're still taxed 10% on the first 15,000.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So what these are marginal tax rates. These are marginal tax rates is what these little t's are. And so if you make $32,000, your tax due, your total tax due is 10% of the first $15,000 is $1,500. The next $15,000 that you earn gets zapped with 20%, so you pay $3,000. And finally, any additional income above 30 gets zapped at 30%. So that's going to give us $4,500 if you earned another 15, but that's not how much he's earning. He's earned another 32. So this last thing is just that last $2,000 worth of income times the 30%. 600 bucks. Good. And so Mike's total tax due here is, what do we got? $4,500, $5,100. So the total tax when he settles up with the IRS is $5,100, giving him an average tax rate of how much? What would you do to find the average tax Mike's paying? Divide that by 32,000. Good. So take the total tax, the average tax rate. So let's put the average tax rate is equal to 5,100 divided by 32,000. Total tax paid divided by total income. And Dallas, what'd you get?
15.9%.
15.9%. So that's really what Mike paid on average. But each additional dollar that he earns would cost him 30%. So if he earns another $1,000, it's going to cost him $300 of that. That would add $300 to the tax bill. And what would happen, back to chapter 11, what would happen to his average tax rate as he starts to earn more and more income? What's going to happen to this 15.9? Is it going to get bigger or smaller?
It's going to get bigger.
It's going to get bigger because each additional dollar that he earns is getting taxed at 30. So it's like tugging and pulling on this. If we're at 15.9%, the marginal rate is at 30%. But if he earns just another $1,000, he's going to pay let's just do it. Suppose he earns $33,000. His total tax bill is $5,400. And Dallas, if you're quick with your calculator, $5,400 divided by 33,000 equals 16.3. So each marginal dollar got taxed at 30, but his average only climbed from 15.9 to 16.3. But what about the incentive to work an extra hour? What is the appropriate rate to think about as he's thinking in his life? Should I spend more time at home with my kids? Should I work an extra hour? Should I take time off to go on vacation? What's the appropriate tax rate to use during that decision making for Mike? The average rate or the marginal rate? The marginal rate, right? That's the relevant rate. That's what this whole course is about. Always thinking at the margin. What's all of the additional cost I'm going to incur? What is status quo? What is the world going to look like if I make this decision? If I go to this decision, how much additional cost? How much additional benefit? If the benefit exceeds the cost, do it. If the cost exceeds the benefit, don't. That's microeconomics in a nutshell. That's what we've been going over and over and over and over in each of these various chapters on making decisions at the margin. That's how you become more and more efficient in your decision making. Okay, questions or comments on that? All right, so one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up also was, I'm going to get my eraser over here. How many of you have heard people say, well, it's a tax write-off. I get the tax deduction. I like to give to charity because I get the tax write-off. Right? I'm just going to expense that out. If you're running a small business, well, it's a tax write-off, so I can do it. You've heard that? So here's how the tax write-off works. If Mike chooses to give $1,000 of his, so this extra $1,000 this kind of ties in nicely, I guess. This extra $1,000 that he worked, that he earned, what if he turns around and just gives that to the United Way, right? What did it really cost him?
You just can't tax them.
Okay, so that $1,000 won't be taxed because it's a tax write-off against your taxable income. So what did it really cost Mike to give $1,000 to the United Way? What did it really cost him? $700. So to give the $1,000 to the United Way, he avoided having to pay that extra $300 tax. Because what he really had at the end of the day for working more hours of work and earning $1,000, he only had $700 to go out and spend anyway, right? If he would have ran to Walmart and bought some junk and a flat screen TV and some other stuff, that's what he was going to get in return. But by donating it to qualified charity that you can get a tax deduction on, it only cost him the flat screen TV that he would have been able to buy, which was $700 worth of stuff, not $1,000. United Way, on the other hand, gets $1,000. Government's out $300. You're out $700 worth of a flat screen. United Way gains $1,000. Okay, so that's kind of the tax write-off thing. Any questions or comments on that? All right. So we talked about education, and I want to start today with the intervention. We talked about it, but we didn't really model it directly, of what we might do in the face of a positive externality, an external benefit conveyed to a third party that's not directly related to the transaction. So the story that we told was, you know, we can look at education. Here's the quantity of education. And as an economist, I always like to say, well, before we start letting the government in, what's the market doing? Maybe the market works just fine. Maybe they're not a problem. So in the market for education, there's people that want to get an education. So there's a demand curve, which is equal to the marginal benefit curve. There's a supply curve that's equal to the marginal cost curve, as we've learned. So we've got Ottawa University willing to supply an education. We've got students willing to buy an education. The market works. Those two people exchange funds, and one of them provides some educational material, and we have this many students paying this much tuition in the market. So maybe tuition rates would be $30,000 a year. So tuition's $30,000, and we have 600 people being educated, jumping up on that opportunity. All right, so the problem was, from society's standpoint, we feel there's external benefits, benefits that go to other people, maybe those who aren't even educated at all. We have a society of people that are less likely to commit crimes, and all the story we told before. So society's benefit was somewhere higher than the private person's. Remember, this is you in your seats, and we're just assuming you only care about yourself. You're going to ultimately you might have some cheap talk at dinner to say, you know, I just want to go to school to make the world a better place. Maybe you do, to some degree. But what's really going to get you to pull out 30 grand out of your wallet, or 30 grand to get in here, is probably that you have some expectation that it's worth it, or that you can get some sort of income afterwards. So you don't really care as much about the world in your actions as maybe you do with your mouth. So we want to help fix that, is the good part. So even if you are one of those people, and I know there's a couple of people that want to save the world out there too, and that's okay. we're talking about the average Joe here, the benefit that you get from the education is one thing, but society's benefit's probably a little higher. And so we drew a social benefit curve. The marginal social benefit curve was something higher. The efficient solution from, let's say kind of, God looking down on our island, if God is the master planner looking and saying, well, the efficient solution for society would be to have this much education, that this much would be where society's benefit of the last person educated would be equal to society's cost of the last person educated. So one of our underlying assumptions the whole semester was that the social benefit and the private benefit were one and the same. We're breaking that link now. As long as Ottawa University is not creating some pollution or something, we believe that that link is still true up here. So society's cost is embodied in the cost that Ottawa University has in providing education. So the allocatively efficient solution, QAE, that we've been identifying all semester in various ways, is right there. And this shows what we put on the board last time, that there's not enough education, that it's underproduced. Now, what is this little area? Deadweight loss. Good guess. And I shouldn't say guess. Your answer is probably right if you know why it's the deadweight loss. Do we have a tax here or something? How did we get deadweight losses before? Remember we did that whole matrix? Government intervention caused deadweight loss. Do I have any government intervention here?
No.
No. So the story is that we have a deadweight loss from the market. The free market has a deadweight loss now. So we've kind of changed the tune. The market's not getting the right answer. The right answer's here, the efficient answer's here. So now there's a deadweight loss from the market.
Market failure.
Market failure, yes. This was one of our forms of market failure. Now, we created that deadweight loss back in Chapter 6 by imposing what type of government intervention when we made the graph look like this? A subsidy. Remember we had the little subsidy tax wedge, but we're entering from this side rather than this side. We'll be doing this side later, but we're coming in from this side. Forget that the orange curve is there. If you can kind of delete the orange curve, the subsidy gets wedged in. The top part of the wedge touches the supply curve. The bottom part of the wedge touches the demand curve. And the subsidy causes a deadweight loss. Now, what's happening here if we impose a subsidy equal to the external benefit? What happens to the deadweight loss? Does it get bigger? It gets eliminated. So that's the big difference here. If we impose the subsidy, here's the subsidy wedge, so the vertical height is the subsidy which is set equal to the external benefit, which is the externality. So we're going to set the subsidy equal to this amount. This is the amount of dollars that we're going to have in Pell Grants. This is the amount of money that we're going to have in some sort of form. What's the effects of that? Again, if you eliminate the orange line, try to make believe that the orange line is gone. The top part of it touches the supply curve telling you what? What is this over here? What was it in the other chapters? We had these two things. We had a price down here, we had a price up here. Which one's which with the subsidy? Which one's the lower one? Which one's the higher one? Who's our players? What are these prices doing anyway? So it caused a separation between what? Producer and consumer prices that they pay. Good.
So would it be the school and the students then?
The school and the students in this case. Good. Which one's which? Which one's the high one? Which one's the low one? Top one is the school. Bottom one's the students. So the price that the consumer pays is down here. The price that the producer receives, Ottawa University, is up here. And at the end of the day, one of the important lessons is that they share the benefits of the subsidy. Ottawa's going to end up getting higher tuition, and I guess I'll just make up some numbers here to motivate this. At the end of the day, they get $35,000 worth of tuition. The students pay $25,000 of tuition. $10,000 per person came in the form of some Pell Grant, and this big area here was the amount of the subsidy. PP is the producer price. Yep, so PP is the producer price. Here this is OU using our numbers. And PC is the consumer price in general, which is our student tuition price. So the important takeaway here is that the government, through policy, is eliminating deadweight loss rather than creating it. So in the other story, when there wasn't anything wrong with the market in the first place, we caused that inefficiency. Now the government is, in theory, helping this issue. So government subsidy eliminates deadweight loss rather than creating it. Okay, so that's a little easier said than done. What are some problems that might occur where there might be, again, some government failure as opposed to market failure? We already knew that the market wasn't getting the right thing. We kind of did this a little bit with the monopoly situation where the government imposed a regulation and then we had some consequences that we didn't really think about, some unintended consequences. What do you think could happen here? What stories do you know of what some of your friends, but not you, have done with student loans? Gotten in over their heads, bought the flat screen TV, used it to buy a car instead of really putting towards tuition, right? Lived a little, couple extra spring break trips and whatever else, using that money when you didn't really need it, causing yourself to have a big old load of debt when you get out, so it can create some inefficiencies that way. So that's a possibility. Anything else you can think of? Does the university like this policy?
Yes.
Yeah, works out pretty nice, even if they give it to the students. Remember, the grant could go to the students, but the benefit of the grant ultimately gets shared between both parties, depending on the relative elasticities of supply and demand. They're going to be sharing it. So the university likes this. So would it be in the best interest of the university to support lobbying efforts in Congress to support education?
Yeah.
Only because education is good for everyone, though, of course. Not because they would receive some sort of additional funds. Yeah, so that's another distortion that could come into the market, which is huge right now. Everybody loves education. Every presidential campaign, every presidential candidate is pretty much death to getting in if they are somehow anti-education in almost any way, shape, or form, if there's something that's somewhat critical on education. And so these types of programs tend to get bigger or smaller? Bigger. And so as we start to make the program bigger, what happens? Are we overproducing or underproducing relative to QAE? Over. Boom. We're right back into now my little subsidy wedge that used to be 10,000 per student. Well, it's got to be 20,000 per student. You know that education is good stuff. That education is good stuff. But as soon as we start to do this, look at what happened. If I impose a subsidy up here, now the cost associated, the social cost associated with that big of a subsidy is here. The social benefit is not down here, it's actually up here, but it's still a waste of money. So now we get right back into creating some deadweight loss if we're not able to really estimate well what those external benefits are. And by the way, do you think that's easy to estimate?
No.
No. The external benefits of education are very difficult to estimate. Much easier, by the way, to estimate the private benefits. That's not that hard. We can do studies to say what business economics majors' expected starting pay is $48,400 and some dollars, which is the highest, by the way. A little plug here for business econ, which is the highest among all the business school majors. So 48,000 starting pay. Some of the other ones might be 40. So my point is, we can measure the private benefits a lot easier than these external benefits. And from a political standpoint, the external benefits make a nice campaign trail thing. And so again, we start to see maybe the size of this stuff grow bigger than what would be efficient. So let's raise those two issues here. So let's put this under the heading of government failure. And possibly some mismanagement here with the students, but if they, it's kind of a failure on you personally. It turned out not to cause too many problems once they changed the law, the whole student loan thing. From an accountant standpoint, you want to borrow money, I don't care if you get the student loan or not, and make a bonehead thing and get yourself too deep in debt, you're the one who's going to have to pay the consequences, right? So that's kind of no harm but to yourself type of thing, and so economists would be less worried about that. They changed the law, and this is good for you guys to know. You cannot bankrupt yourself out of your student loans. That's where there was a social problem because, oh, I can just say I'm a student and I'm going to borrow $100,000 worth of debt, but I'm really buying flat screens and TVs and showing up to class once in a while, but I don't really care about education, I just want the money. And then boom, file bankruptcy and all that money goes away. So that was stopped. I don't know what year that was, but they changed bankruptcy laws so that you cannot get out of your student loans. So IRS debt and student loan debt are non-bankruptable. So you will be stuck with it. So be careful with your borrowings in student loans. On the government failure side, we could have growth of Q beyond QAE if schools lobby politicians and people are rationally ignorant, which we said is probably something that runs rampant in the political realm. So a combination of rational ignorance and lobbyists can make us start to see the quantity get bigger and bigger. This would start to create a deadweight loss. Will create deadweight loss again. And then we're kind of back to that conundrum of is it better to leave the market alone, or is it better to have the government involved, and can we compare the deadweight loss of one versus the other? Oh, that's tough to estimate. Okay, questions or comments on that? All right. That is what I wanted to cover in chapter 16. So, I'm going to really stay with the same topic at the first part of chapter 17. And we're going to start off by focusing in on negative externalities. Put that into work order. Okay, so negative externality. We talked about a few of them. What are negative externalities? Give me some examples, I should say, of negative externalities.
Buy some land for a garden. You dig to plant your seeds, and there's pipeline.
You're not done yet. So what you've described so far is not a negative externality. It is a negative circumstance.
Right.
It's a negative thing. So what Corbin said was, you go to plant your garden, which by the way is an example of positive externality potentially.
Right.
You build a beautiful garden. What happens to your neighbor's property value?
Oh, see,
Might go up, right? So if your neighbor's property value goes up because of the money that you spent on your beautiful garden and all the time and dollars and everything, your neighbor didn't contribute a dime to it, so he's getting all of that benefit for free. His property value is going up if you keep yourself a nice garden. So, what if as you're digging that new garden, you find, what'd you say, a pipeline?
There's a pipeline.
Okay, so you got a pipeline. Not a problem so far. You own the property. It sucks for you, but it's not a negative externality. What's one of the key ingredients, again, we need to make it an externality?
Cost to a third party.
Cost to a third party. We always got to be thinking of somebody that's outside of a transaction that's getting negatively affected. So, where I was thinking is that as you're digging and smoking, you strike the pipeline, and what happens? You blow up. Now, this wouldn't be a problem again. Again, it kind of sucks for you because you blew up, but if it only blew up your house and your yard,
There's no negative.
no externality. No big deal in terms of external
A
effects.
rock hits your neighbor's window.
But yeah, there you go. The rock hits the neighbor's window, or it's a pretty darn big pipeline and you blow up the whole block. You've just created a negative externality for the whole block if you wiped out all your neighbors' houses along the way. Okay? So negative externality, that might be one. In fact, this happened at the, I don't know how many neighbors were affected, but remember that fertilizer plant down in Texas? That was a huge explosion. I don't know if you saw that on YouTube or not, or some of the clips, but they did blow up a whole city block, and I don't know if the plant was isolated enough that they really only blew themselves up or if it hit others, but could happen. So negative externality, hit pipeline, gas pipeline, while smoking, and explosion wipes out neighbors' houses. Kind of wanted to write it out like this. I've never done this part. This is the part that's the negative externality. So the negative externality is this section of it. This, when you do your own house, just kind of sucks for you. So it's common for students to get confused about things that suck and calling them a negative externality. Not everything that sucks is a negative externality. It has to hit those third parties. Okay, so pollution is one of our things we had if you're a producer and you're polluting. Now, what about on the consumer side? There's another negative externality, kind of closely akin to pollution that consumers do. How do consumers pollute? Yes, smoking. So secondhand smoke has been a cause of some negative externalities, causing, in some cases, smokers to have to smoke outside buildings.
Oh, gosh.
And smoke down the street and on sidewalks. At Iowa State, at the State University, they passed not too long ago where you could not be on university property to smoke. So the smokers had to go outside to the sidewalk, to the city street, and we have a large campus up at Iowa State. I mean, it's a land-grant university that's like the size of KU. If you guys are familiar with that, K-State or KU. And so sometimes they had to walk multiple blocks to get outside university property to have their
By the time they were
cigarette.
there, they were
So,
certainly ready for a smoke, though.
So what does that all look like? Well, let's draw another graph here. And we've got the good old-fashioned home base that we've come to love and learn over the course of the time. We've got demand and supply, and there's a starting price and a starting quantity. And maybe we could even go back to the beer market here if you want. So we got the quantity of beer.
I missed that.
Nothing wrong with a case of beer selling for $18. Must be some natty or something. Good stuff might run a little more than that. So, home base. Now let's make the beer producers a polluter. If they are polluting, what's the problem? How do we capture the external cost factor? Where does the social cost curve lie relative to the private cost curve? Down. Okay? Everybody agree with that?
We're talking about cost curve?
Yeah, because I'm thinking it's the beer producer that's causing the pollution.
No. It's the cost curve itself.
So which one's the cost curve? Supply. And what type of cost curve is it? Marginal cost. So we learned that the marginal private cost is there. So it's always good to start off here too. We got beer drinkers who are not getting drunk and causing problems for their neighbors at this point.
For now.
And so the demand for beer is captured by the private benefits that those folks have by putting back a cold one. All right, so the market is going on again, $18 a case and some sort of quantity. Where are the social costs if the beer producer is causing some pollution? It's above it. Good. So, at this quantity, the beer producer has $18 worth of marginal cost for the 1,000th case of beer. The 1,000th case of beer costs the beer producer $18. That's what we've been doing the whole semester. But society's costs are a little higher if while they're producing those 1,000 beers, they are kicking out some toxins into the air that are floating down to the neighboring city, having the babies with a third eye in the middle of their head or something. Right? So some sort of toxin is causing the social cost to be higher. It's not only at that quantity, but at this quantity, Budweiser's cost was this, society's cost is this. At this quantity, Budweiser's cost is higher, but society's cost is even higher, because now they're doing more of that. Now, I want to point out that it doesn't have to be a parallel shift. It could be that, depending on the type of pollutant it is, that when we get up to this level, the external cost is really high, and when it's down low, it's real low. So it doesn't have to be a parallel shift. but it could be. So however you draw your line, it doesn't really matter. I just wanted to point that out. So the society's, the marginal social cost, the MSC, is something higher. All right, so where is society's optimal quantity? Down there, so this way?
AE.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking for AEs, the allocatively efficient quantity. Where they intersect. Now that's not the right answer unless you know some other information. What must be true for that to be the correct answer? I'll give you a hint, the drunk driving thing. What'd you say, Austin?
Demand curve is the marginal social benefit.
Good. The demand curve is the marginal social benefit curve, which is our baseline assumption, unless something else is stated. Again, the benefits of additional beers are all in the people who buy those beers, and we don't have any external effects there. So if that's the case, you guys are absolutely right. The social benefit and social cost curve intersect here, so there is the allocatively efficient quantity. All right, so market failure. The market is failing to produce and consume at society's most optimal level. Government intervention thoughts. A tax, good. How much? And I'll just tell you, you can't give me an exact number, but how much?
If our little wedge.
The wedge, you're seeing the wedge. What's the wedge equal to? What's the amount of the tax need to be equal to?
What's
Rather than a distance, tell me in words. I think you guys are getting the distance thing. The difference between what?
Marginal social cost and marginal cost.
Good. Which is called what? That's right. What do we call the difference between the marginal social cost and the marginal cost? Nope, not deadweight loss. Deadweight loss would be an area. The externality, the external benefit. So, or the external cost, rather, in this case. So the external cost, the externality, the third party thing is this vertical distance. So we're going to set the tax equal to that amount. It's called a Pigouvian tax, named after economist Pigou. Kind of a fun name to say. He's the one that came up with that concept, that we could use a tax to get the allocatively efficient outcomes. So, doing our tax wedge thing, we can set the tax equal to this amount. So set the tax equal to the external cost. By doing so, QT, the quantity after the tax, becomes QAE. So remember, we used to put QT down here? The quantity after the tax now becomes the allocatively efficient quantity. The top part of the wedge touches the demand curve, the private demand curve, so consumers are going to pay that price. But Budweiser's only going to get this price, PP. And the government is going to collect tax revenue equal to the amount of the tax, which was the external cost, times QT. Now, what we're not addressing is what they do with that money. Are they going to give it to the kid with the third eye? Or are they going to come up with some other things to offset the pollution that the company's doing? You know, what are they going to do? I don't know. All right, so one option. So let's put on here kind of government policy. Maybe I'll erase this. Government policy to correct use that word, that correct the market failure. Number 1, tax. I already said it, but I'll say it again. Set tax equal to the external cost. This is called a Pigouvian tax, named after Pigou. And I guess the key result that might be worth putting down here is that QT equals QAE. The quantity after the tax ends up being the allocatively efficient quantity. Okay, what are some other ways that governments approach pollution? What other policies? This is just one. We've got other policy tools in our arsenal that we looked at way back in chapter 6.
Monitor like air quality.
Yeah.
Monitor the air quality. Okay, so they could basically tell the producer to not do it, right? You can't pollute. There's a law on the books.
Cork your chips.
So through regulation, they could just say you can't do it. Figure it out on your own. So government regulation, possibly that says, don't do it. And like you said, that might cause some monitoring cost if the government has to police it now. So there might be some monitoring costs by government to police it. So that's one thing we want to be thinking about. We just don't want to take those companies' word on it. Okay, we won't.
Would fines to the company be another factor, or no?
Yes, that would be part of the monitoring function. So, does the company just all of a sudden quit doing it? How does government regulation affect the company? What happens in terms of the company's bottom line? What do you think when you impose regulations and restrictions like that? What does the company do? Costs go up, right? So they don't, by the way, if it wasn't polluting, they wouldn't just magically change and do it, right? So it probably costs money to invest in new technology that doesn't allow the plant to emit the toxins that are causing the third eye, right? So they might impose some restrictions and the company has to figure it out. So if the company has to spend money now, what happens to the private cost curve? What did we learn from the other chapters? Shifts. And so look at what's going on. As we impose that cost of the air on the company, saying, company, you can't use the air for free. You got to figure it out. I don't care how you do it, but we're going to watch you to make sure you do it right. The cost curve, the supply curve shifts to the left, and we end up getting the same result, potentially. That we can get rid of the external cost that way, but let the companies figure it out. Supply shifts to the left, we kind of end up possibly at the same position. So government regulation might be one. Don't do it, monitor it. This is going to cause some costs to the company. Supply curve shifts left, and we kind of get a similar result. Supply curve shifts left, and the new quantity supplied by the market is equal to the allocatively efficient quantity. The external cost is kind of dealt with that way. All right, we will pick up there next time.